Welcome to this explainer. Whenever we see a massively successful business, it's so easy to just focus on their flashy new product or some viral marketing campaign. But underneath all of that is a carefully constructed organizational structure that dictates exactly how everything gets done. Today, we're going to dive right into that invisible architecture and turn some abstract textbook theory into a dynamic blueprint for building a successful company. We'll be moving through 5 fundamental building blocks of organizational design: the management pyramid, specializing the work, designing departments, the organization chart, and finally, command and control. Let's get right into it. Starting off with part 1, the management pyramid. Let's look at how management is actually layered within a company. Take a look at how a typical organization naturally forms a pyramid. It's got this narrow peak of top managers up high, resting securely on a super broad, sturdy base of first-line supervisors at the bottom. Honestly, just that shape alone tells you a ton about how power is distributed in your standard corporate world. So, what's actually happening at these different levels? Well, as you move up the pyramid, the jobs demand way more intensive planning and major decision-making. Top managers, they're the visionaries. They're scanning the horizon and setting the big, overarching goals. Then you have middle managers, right in the center, allocating resources and keeping an eye on the folks below them. Meanwhile, that broad bottom layer is all about the day-to-day grind. First-line managers are literally in the trenches, supervising the team and coordinating the daily activities that actually keep the lights on. All right, moving right along to section 2, specializing the work. How do we divide things up? The big idea here is specialization. This is how you take these massive, seemingly impossible company goals and break them down into specific tasks that actual humans can master. I mean, think about it. Instead of one incredibly stressed out person trying to juggle accounting, marketing, and sales all before lunch, you organize those activities into distinct, manageable clusters. But, and this is a big but, it's a delicate balancing act. Specialization is great because it absolutely skyrockets efficiency and makes jobs way easier to learn. However, doing the exact same thing over and over again, that leads to some serious boredom and burnout. If a company overspecializes, they're going to start seeing dropping performance, more people calling out sick, and incredibly high turnover, mostly just because workers lose their sense of purpose. Okay, let's look at section 3, designing the departments, where we actually group those specialized jobs together. So once you've got those specialized jobs, how do you group them? Companies usually take one of 2 paths. First, there's the functional structure. This groups people with similar skills together, like your classic HR or accounting departments. Fantastic for small or medium businesses. But when a company really starts to scale up, they usually shift to a divisional structure. This is where giant corporations operate almost like a bunch of autonomous mini companies all living under one massive corporate umbrella. You can actually see this in action with some real-world titans, and they categorize these divisions in a few distinct ways. General Motors, for instance, uses product lines, splitting into distinct brands like Buick, Cadillac, and Chevy. Johnson & Johnson focuses on the customer base, so they separate consumer products from pharmaceuticals. And that makes total sense, right? Selling prescription drugs involves insane regulations and long sales cycles. It is a completely different beast than selling baby shampoo. Or look at a manufacturing giant like Boehringer. They divide by the actual steps of their process, from chopping down trees to chemically treating them, all the way to finishing the paper. Now, there's one more major way to create divisions, and if a company is expanding globally, this is an absolute must: geographical division. This simply means structuring your operations based on the specific regions of the world you're operating in, so you can actually respond to your local customers quickly and effectively. Take Adidas as a perfect example. They intentionally carve up their massive global footprint into distinct, locally focused regions, places like Greater China, Latin America, and MEMEA, which is Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. For a huge global brand, this kind of geographic split is often the absolute best way to stay responsive to local markets and unique cultural trends that some centralized headquarters halfway across the world would totally miss. Now let's map this all out in section 4, the organization chart. Okay, picture this. You're the president of a fictional startup called Notes for You. A standard functional organization chart is going to clearly lay out exactly who reports to whom. You can quite literally trace the lines of authority straight down from the owner at the very top to the marketing manager and then down to the sales supervisor. It creates this super transparent, unbroken chain of command. Everyone knows exactly who their boss is. But here's the million-dollar question. What happens to that chart when your company actually starts growing?
A simple functional setup is awesome for a scrappy startup, but the second you start rapidly expanding your product lines or your customer base, that rigid chart can suddenly become a massive bottleneck that totally suffocates innovation. So, as you get bigger, you have to adapt. Say you run a massive theme park, you might need to split your management into entirely separate divisions for rides and concessions, because let's be real, running a high-speed roller coaster is very different from selling hot dogs. Or if you're a bank president, you might divide things right from the top based on your customers, separating everyday retail consumers from big commercial business clients. Now, for really complex, fast-moving projects, a company might evolve into what's called a matrix structure. This is where you pull together specialized teams from all those different functional areas. So instead of just vertical reporting lines, you suddenly have horizontal ones too. You might have a product manager working directly with experts from design, manufacturing, and finance. Just a heads up though, this structure is notoriously tricky to manage, mostly because employees have to constantly juggle competing priorities from multiple bosses. Nike actually uses this exact matrix twist brilliantly in the real world. They take designers, marketers, and researchers from their standard functional departments and combine them into dedicated task forces focused entirely on specific sports, like running or basketball. It's a game changer. It allows for this intense, laser-focused collaboration without forcing everyone to completely abandon their original home departments. And that brings us to our final piece, Section 5, Command and Control. Let's look at how power flows through all this. So traditional business structures lean heavily on this idea of unity of command, basically making sure nobody gets conflicting directions. You have one boss, period. But that matrix structure we just talked about, it intentionally throws this rule right out the window. In a matrix, an employee might actually report to both a functional manager and a product manager at the exact same time. As you can imagine, that requires some serious communication and emotional intelligence to keep power struggles from tearing the team apart. Another thing to watch out for is that as companies grow, they risk becoming tall organizations. They just keep stacking layer after layer of middle management. This gives managers a really narrow span of control, but man, it makes decision-making painfully slow and bureaucratic. That is exactly why so many modern companies are aggressively flattening their structures by cutting out those middle layers. This gives managers a much wider span of control, meaning way more people reporting directly to them. Sure, it vastly speeds up communication, but it also drops a pretty heavy workload squarely on the shoulders of those managers. To survive in one of those flat structures, managers absolutely have to learn how to delegate. And this brings us to the ultimate organizational trade-off: centralization versus decentralization. Do you keep decision-making locked up tight at the very top for maximum consistency and control? Or do you decentralize, pushing that vital decision-making power all the way down to the front lines so your company can actually react swiftly to what customers need right now? Since there's honestly no single perfect design out there, it leaves us with a really crucial thought to chew on when we look at our own jobs. Does your company's blueprint actually empower you, or is it structured to slow you down? Are you too tall, too flat, too centralized, or did they find that perfect balance? Next time you're at work, take a real look at your organization's chart. I guarantee you'll start seeing this invisible architecture guiding literally every single decision. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning how the world around you is built.